Have you ever felt invisible, like you don't matter to the people who are supposed to care about you the most? Imagine being humiliated by your own sister in front of an entire room, and then discovering you hold the power to change everything. What happens when the quiet one finally decides to fight back? Well, I'll tell you, it's not just about revenge. It's about taking control of your life and your future. Stick around to find out how I turned my family's betrayal into my greatest victory. My name is Olivia, and I've always felt like I was the shadow in my own family. I'm 42 now, but I've carried the weight of being overlooked for as long as I can remember. Growing up, I was always the less important one. The one who quietly existed in the background while everyone else shone. My sister, Vanessa, had always been the golden child. She was the one with the corporate job and the big title. Cassandra, my other sister, was the social butterfly, always surrounded by people, charming and manipulative. And then there was me, just Olivia. I'll never forget my 10th birthday. I spent weeks working on a gift for my parents, a painting of a lighthouse. My hands were covered in blue and gray paint, but I was so proud. I wanted to give them something special. When I handed it to them, I was met with indifference. My father barely glanced at it before he turned to my sisters and asked what they got him. They had pooled their allowances to buy a fancy crystal vase. My mother clapped her hands in delight, but my painting was tossed aside on the side table. That moment told me everything I needed to know about my place in the family. I wasn't the smart one, or the pretty one, or the successful one. I was just the invisible one. As we grew older, that dynamic solidified. It wasn't something that changed, it was something that became permanent. It felt like concrete had set around my feet, making it impossible to move forward. One evening at dinner, I tried to share some good news. I'd been volunteering at a local community garden, and we had secured a small grant to build a children's section. I was so excited. But as soon as I opened my mouth, Vanessa cut me off. She had just been promoted at work, and the entire conversation shifted to her new title, her bonus, and her plans to buy a new car. My little victory disappeared into the void, and I sat there, feeling invisible once again. The only person who ever really saw me was my grandfather. He was a quiet man like me, but his eyes missed nothing. Before he passed away, he left me a small wooden box with an old-fashioned key inside. The note read, "For the youngest, because she has the biggest heart. Use it when they forget who you are." Along with the box, he made me the executor of a small family trust fund. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was a piece of my grandfather's legacy, and I was the one who was supposed to safeguard it. Recently, though, I'd noticed some odd withdrawals from the account. Small amounts taken by Cassandra. I made a mental note to look into it, but pushed it aside. I told myself it couldn't be anything serious. After all, it was family. I always tried to believe the best in them, even when they gave me every reason not to. The good thing about being invisible, though, was that it forced me to build my life on my own terms. I didn't need their approval. I had my small, simple apartment and my books. And I had Mrs. Gable, my neighbor, who had become more of a mother to me than my own ever was. She called me just to share a recipe or tell me a funny story about her late husband.
She saw me.
One cold Tuesday morning, Mrs. Gable called, her voice filled with concern. Her heating was broken, and the repairman wanted $150 upfront. She was on a fixed income, and she didn't have the money. I promised her I would go to the bank and get it for her. I wasn't worried. I could do this. After all, I had my own life now, away from my family's expectations. I arrived at Crescent Bank, standing in line, trying to ignore the awkwardness that always came with being in the same place as my sister. She worked there as a manager, and even though she never acknowledged me, I still felt her presence. When it was my turn, I approached the teller, but before I could even speak, Vanessa appeared, her heels clicking sharply on the floor. She flashed me a smug little smile, like she knew something I didn't. Well, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "What can we do for you, Olivia?" I kept my voice steady. "I just need to withdraw $150. Her laugh was sharp, cutting through the silence like a knife. $150? Is that all? She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a stage whisper that was loud enough for everyone in the bank to hear. "We don't really serve beggars here. Are you sure you even have that much in your account?" The air in the room seemed to freeze. I felt the heat rise in my neck, my stomach churn. The other customers were watching, some with pity, others with morbid curiosity. The teller looked uncomfortable, glancing from Vanessa to me. I felt like I was suffocating. But I didn't scream. I didn't make a scene. I wasn't angry. I was just tired. Tired of always being the one who was overlooked, the one who was humiliated, the one who didn't matter. Without saying a word, I turned around and walked out of the bank. The door hissed shut behind me. I didn't know it then, but that was just the beginning. Part 2. The calm before the storm. That night, I sat in my small apartment, the silence pressing in around me. My once cozy space felt confining now. I made myself a cup of tea, my hands shaking slightly, and sat on my worn sofa. It wasn't a fancy couch, but it was mine. Everything in my apartment was like that. Humble, secondhand, but it was a life I had built on my own, away from the chaos of my family. I opened my laptop. It wasn't the fastest machine, but it was secure. The screen flickered for a moment, and then a clean, minimalist dashboard appeared. At the top in bold, white letters on a black background, was the name Shell Code 7. Beneath that was a number almost surreal to see, $4.2 billion. This was my secret, the life I had been living in the shadows. The life I had built while my family looked down on me for my modest lifestyle, my quiet existence. After a particularly nasty argument years ago, where my father told me I'd never amount to anything, I had walked away. I had taken the small inheritance my grandfather had left me, the one outside the family trust, and poured everything I had, my grief, my intelligence, my focus, into building something. I had learned to read patterns, to understand the financial markets in a way they never could. It wasn't just a small hobby or a side project. It was a creation. I had built a predictive algorithm, a piece of code so elegant and complex, it was almost poetic. I named it Move, after the mourning doves that used to coo outside my window when I was young. Move wasn't just a program. It was an entity, a ghost in the machine. And I was its architect. Shell Code 7 was the fund I had created, built on that algorithm. It wasn't just some small, private thing. It had grown into a giant. To the world, I was just Olivia, a quiet, unassuming woman living in Cincinnati. But I wasn't just Olivia. I was the one behind a multi-billion-dollar asset transfer. I chuckled bitterly at the irony of it all. Vanessa, my sister who had just publicly humiliated me for needing $150, was working at a bank where I was now pulling all my assets. The same bank, Crescent Bank, had become a subsidiary serving my fund. She worked for me and didn't even know it. The thought of her being so smug, so self-assured in her position, while I sat there quietly in my apartment, was almost too much. But I wasn't looking for revenge. I had just been surviving. But now, as I stared at the screen, I realized this wasn't just a chance to make things right. It was an opportunity, one I had to take, but it had to be done carefully, with precision. It wasn't going to be some emotional outburst. It was going to be strategic, calculated. I spent the rest of the night preparing. I wasn't angry, not yet. But there was something inside me, something I hadn't felt in years, stirring. It wasn't rage. It was purpose. The next morning, I dressed in a simple navy blue dress, no flashy jewelry, no designer bags. I didn't need those things. My power wasn't in what I wore, but in what I knew. As I stood in front of the mirror, I felt a flicker of doubt, a voice that sounded a lot like my mother's whispering in my ear. "Is this necessary, Olivia? Why cause such a fuss? Who is this person staring back at you?" For a moment, I felt a wave of nausea. Was I really about to do this? Was I becoming like them? Was I about to destroy my own sister's life? I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I walked over to the old wooden box my grandfather had left me. I opened it and took out the note he had written. His handwriting was elegant, the ink faded but still clear. "For the youngest, because she has the biggest heart. Use it when they forget who you are." My grandfather had always seen me for who I was. He didn't see me as the quiet, invisible one. He saw my potential, my worth. He had entrusted me with the family's legacy, the family trust. He had known that one day I would have to make a decision like this. I closed my eyes and took another deep breath. This wasn't about revenge. It was about boundaries. It was about respecting myself, my worth, my heart. I wasn't going to let them walk all over me anymore. I put the note in my purse as a reminder. It wasn't just a family heirloom. It was armor. And I needed it now more than ever. I walked out of my apartment, calm, collected, and ready. I wasn't going to just walk into Crescent Bank. I was going to walk in as someone who held the power. I was no longer the invisible sister. I was Olivia. And that was enough. Part 3. The Reckoning. When I arrived at Crescent Bank, the atmosphere was entirely different. It wasn't the usual sterile professionalism I'd grown up with. The tension in the air was palpable, the air heavy with the weight of something that had shifted irrevocably. As I entered, a man in an expensive suit, nervous, fidgeting, rushed forward. His eyes darted around the lobby before settling on me. "Miss Dove," he said, his voice a bit too high-pitched. "An absolute honor. I'm Marcus Chin, the regional director." His handshake was awkward, almost desperate. He had clearly been briefed, but not in the way he expected. I followed him into a conference room. The entire setup was different. It was no longer Vanessa's little kingdom, it was now my domain. As we entered, Vanessa stood near her glass-walled office, her face dropping the instant she saw me. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. It was the first time I had ever seen her truly speechless. She quickly tried to regain her composure, but there was no hiding the shock. "Please, Miss Dove," Marcus said, guiding me toward the office. "We can talk in here." I could feel Vanessa's eyes on me as we passed. They were full of confusion and, if I was being honest, a little bit of fear. I sat down at the visitor's chair, my posture calm and composed. Marcus stood near the door, wringing his hands like he was about to be scolded. But it wasn't him who needed to be worried. It was Vanessa. Vanessa entered the room, her arms crossed, trying to project authority, but the facade was cracking. She had always been the one in control, the one with the power. But today, the power had shifted. And she wasn't in control anymore. I leaned back in my chair, my voice quiet but firm. "Shell Code 7 has some concerns." Marcus, his face pale, nodded. "Of course, Miss Dove. Anything we can do to help." I looked from Marcus to Vanessa. "It's not about what you can do to help. It's about a decision we've already made. Due to, let's call them, serious concerns about the professional culture and management competency at this branch, Shell Code 7 is initiating a hostile asset transfer." I watched as the color drained from Marcus's face. He was clearly processing what I had just said, his mind struggling to catch up. Vanessa, however, was still trying to piece things together. She stared at me blankly. "A what?" she finally asked, her voice faltering. I turned to her, my gaze locking with hers. "It's a banking term, Vanessa. Let me simplify it for you. It means my fund is publicly declaring that your bank's parent company is too incompetent and too risky to manage our money. We are pulling all of our assets. We're taking $4.2 billion and moving it to a competitor. And, per the terms of our agreement, we are required to state exactly why. The reason will be the loss of confidence in personnel. Specifically, personnel at this branch." Vanessa's face went pale. She looked like she had been punched in the stomach. Her brain was racing, but she couldn't process it fast enough. I continued, my voice steady. "This decision is about your branch. About you. And when this goes public, it will be clear that your incompetence is the reason. You will lose your job, Vanessa. That's inevitable. But the damage to your reputation? That's going to last a lifetime." I could see her fighting to hold herself together, but it was useless. The realization of what was happening was sinking in. It was too much for her to handle. Her voice cracked. You can't do this," she stammered. I'll lose everything. Please, Olivia. Don't do this." I didn't respond. I just watched as her world fell apart, piece by piece. I turned to Marcus, who was still standing frozen by the door, his hands shaking. "I'm sure you understand the gravity of this situation, Mr. Chin," I said. "I trust you'll handle it swiftly. The transfer must be executed immediately." "Of course, Miss Dove," he replied, his voice shaking now. Vanessa stood there, her knees buckling as if her body had given up on her entirely. She collapsed to the floor in a heap. The arrogant, poised woman who had always looked down on me was now a sobbing mess, pleading for mercy, for forgiveness. But it wasn't forgiveness she was asking for. It was survival. She crawled toward me, on her hands and knees, her mascara streaking down her face. "Please, Olivia. Don't do this. Please, I beg you. I'm sorry. Please don't ruin me. You can't take everything from me." I didn't move. I didn't say a word. Mr. Chin, his expression a mask of cold fury, finally stepped forward. "You," he pointed at Vanessa. "You brought this upon us. Get out. Get out of my sight." He turned to the security guards standing just outside the door. "Security, take her away." As the guards gently but firmly lifted Vanessa to her feet, I stood up, feeling the weight of what I had just done. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was never about the money. It was about respect, about my dignity. Before I left the room, I looked at Vanessa one last time. Her face was blotchy, her eyes filled with horror. "This was never about the money, Vanessa," I said quietly, my voice cold. "It was about respect. Something you never learned how to give." I turned and walked out of the bank. The door hissed shut behind me. Part 4. The final break. As I walked away from Crescent Bank, the weight of what had just transpired didn't settle on my shoulders. Instead, there was an eerie quiet, a stillness in the air. I wasn't celebrating. I wasn't gloating. I simply felt calm. A calmness that I hadn't experienced in years. I got into my car, but before I could even start the engine, my phone buzzed. The screen flashed with a message from Cassandra. "OMG, Liv, I heard something crazy happened with Vanessa. Are you okay? We should talk." Another message from Gregory, Cassandra's husband, came in immediately after. I ignored them both. As I started to drive, my phone buzzed again. Another text from my mother. "Olivia, please call me. We are all very worried about you." I let the phone buzz, the notifications piling up, but I refused to look. They weren't worried about me when Vanessa had been grinding me into the dirt. They weren't worried when they made me feel like I didn't matter, like I was less than. Now that the power dynamic had shifted, now that I held the cards, they suddenly cared. But it wasn't real concern. It was fear. Fear of what would happen now that I was no longer the one being trampled on. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I was finally free of the constant strain of their expectations, their manipulations. I was living for myself, now, not for them. Later that evening, as I pulled into my driveway, my phone rang once more. This time, the name on the screen was familiar. It was my mother's name. For a split second, I felt a pang of hesitation. Maybe they'd finally realized the truth. Maybe they were calling to apologize, to truly understand. But I knew better. I answered the phone, and my mother's frantic voice came rushing through. "Olivia, thank God. I heard what happened. What have you done? Vanessa is a mess. Her career is over. You've destroyed her, and now you're going to destroy the family, too. Why would you do this?" I didn't say anything at first. I let her words hang in the air, but the bitterness I had once felt for them, bitterness that had consumed me for years, was gone. I was finally free. I wasn't angry. I was just done. "Think about the family," she continued, her voice frantic now. "What will we do? What about Vanessa? She's worked so hard. You can't just throw it all away. Think about what this will do to all of us." Her words, though drenched in concern, were still about saving face, about protecting the family's reputation. She wasn't worried about the way Vanessa had treated me. She wasn't worried about the years of humiliation. She was worried about her precious image. I let her finish, my silence the only response I gave. When she finally stopped talking, I spoke. My voice was cold, sharper than I had intended. "You're right, Mom. We need to talk about the family. All of us, one last time. I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end. She wasn't expecting that. What do you mean? She asked, her voice suddenly cautious. Sunday, I said, my tone final. Dinner at my place. I'll text you the address. I hung up before she could respond. I didn't need to explain myself. I had already done everything I needed to. The storm had passed. The earthquake was coming. On Sunday evening, the house was quiet as I prepared for dinner. The table was set, and the food was ready. It wasn't extravagant, just a modest meal I had made myself, but it was important. This dinner wasn't about food. It was about closure. I watched from the window as my parents, Cassandra and Gregory, pulled up. Their faces were filled with confusion, disbelief, and something I didn't expect: greed. They couldn't understand. They were standing in front of my house now, staring at the expensive home I had built with my own two hands. They weren't expecting it. They had thought me to be a nobody, an afterthought, but I had built something real. Something they couldn't take away. I opened the door before they could ring the bell. Welcome, I said, my voice steady. They walked inside, gaping at the high ceilings, the tasteful art on the walls, the way the house felt real. It was mine. Not a single penny of it was theirs. My father was the first to speak, his voice gruff. All right, Olivia, what is all this? You've made your point. You're rich now. But you need to fix what you've done with Vanessa. Cassandra chimed in, her voice dripping with false sympathy. You've gone too far, Liv. Your family. You can't just destroy someone's life over something like this. They spent the next several minutes lecturing me, blaming me for ruining Vanessa's life, for being cruel. They never once mentioned the way Vanessa had treated me. Not once did they ask how I was doing, how I felt. They didn't care about that. They cared about their image. When they finished, I stood up. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I just walked over to the side table and picked up a leather-bound file. I placed it in the center of the table. If we're done talking about how I've ruined a life, I said, my voice dangerously quiet, maybe we can talk about how Cassandra has been ruining a legacy. Cassandra's face went pale. What are you talking about? She asked, but her voice trembled. I opened the file and slid a bank statement across the table to my father. I'm talking about the family trust, I said calmly. The one grandfather set up for all of us. The one he trusted me to look after. I slid another document across the table. These are the forged invoices Cassandra submitted from a shell company she created to justify these withdrawals. For 2 years, she's been stealing from us.
From you.
From me. From the memory of the one person in this family who valued integrity. The room fell into absolute silence. If you've made it this far, you know how one simple act of courage can change your entire life. Sometimes, we have to make the difficult choice to distance ourselves from those who have hurt us, even when it's painful. As we've seen in this story, it's possible to turn pain into strength, and more importantly, into freedom. If you identified with or were moved by this journey, don't forget to like, share with those who need to hear this, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more amazing and inspiring stories. We're in this together because you're not alone. See you in the next video.